Priyanka Chopra, I think she's very popular. I really follow her because I really admire her as a woman. I think that she has a lot of talent, but also this kind of feminine power that I really adore when you have a very strong voice and at the same time you fully embrace your femininity and beauty, and at the same time you can be a real spokesperson for rights, for everything, that she stands for, and I really admire her. Yes, and you know what? We grew up with a lot of films from Bollywood. I remember it was a whole thing because growing up in post-Soviet times, and then my parents in Soviet times, Bollywood was a big part of their cinematic upbringing. I think that initially it started with the place. I traveled. Of course, it's anti-war film. There's a lot of like post-war trauma in it, but I think, especially in our region, it's something that we live with, all of us, without sometimes even realizing, because we've been subjected to so many conflicts, and it's such part of our recent history, with the fall of Soviet Union, the war we had in the 80s with Armenia, the first war, and then, it just somehow all the time, the region is just very turbulent. And as Middle Easterners, and I think everyone would understand, but it's not something that you actively think about until it happens again. And I think that in 2020 there was another war over Karabakh, and so afterwards I think that it just hit us differently. And so about 9 or 10 months after that, I traveled around this region in the mountains and ended up in this forest that looked like an enchanted forest with these stones. And then later on, these stones sort of like emerge from the ground, and you realize as you walk through that you're in a graveyard. And it's a really strange feeling when you think you're just in the forest. Yeah. So and then you suddenly realize you're standing in the graveyard, and it looks like this enchanted forest, and it was quite of this eerie presence. And apparently that was like a 13th century military graveyard, because there was a big battle there, and they just buried the soldiers right there and then in the middle of, and then the forest came on top of that, and it just became this like really strange place of beauty, but also this awareness of death. And I think that, whilst I was there, I thought, what, this would be so beautiful to film here, and it's just so poignant, this place. And that's how the story was born, really. And so in that village where we ended up filming it. When I was little, we broke away from Soviet Union, and that was, we had a day when, tanks came into Baku, started shooting at civilians, the Russian tanks. And this was, I was very little then. So I just remember there was constantly a feeling of anxiety and uncertainty. And then the first Karabakh war, I remember we had military curfews all the time. I remember going from my aunt's house to my house with my father, and we had to go under some separators in the middle of an empty street, not to be caught by police. And all we were doing was just visiting my aunt, and it was kind of like an adventure. I remember my dad was saying, "Oh, we need to go over this barriers," as if, and I thought that, oh my God. And then later on, when I grew up, I realized that in the 90s it was crazy. After the Soviet Union collapse, we had military coups in the country all the time, and it felt like, to a child it might feel like an adventure, but really it's very serious, and the people were never free to live fully like they wanted to live. They were constantly scared. And so then for a while it was, of course, quiet. So for 30 years it was all normal and stable, but I feel that it was always sort of taught to us, and we always learned about this conflict, and it's kind of in the background that it will happen again, because it's such unresolved issues and occupied lands and all of this hatred on both sides. It was kind of, I feel like this is what destroys us also as people. And I think that when this war happened in 2020, we were in Baku. I was living in Baku at the time, and we had some rockets flying and all this military equipment moving, everyone glued to their phones and just following the news, some cities nearby being bombed, and so it didn't come all the way to Baku, of course, so I can't say that I experienced it firsthand. But within the country, the sentiment was very, very bad and dark. To be honest, I mean, the movies I'm working on now are slightly different. Recently, each film is a new project, and so of course this is a conflict that's unfolding now in front of our eyes. I'm following it closely, and I'm completely distraught by it. But it's not something that I'm immediately working on. But I think, let's see. But I don't think it's my story to tell, because I'm not from there, and it's you know we have to speak for those that, in the art you need to talk about that. For me, I have to talk about very personal things that are coming from within my life immediate experience. And so I think that there will be plenty of Palestinian voices, making these films. I'm sure also on Israel side, and yes. And you know what, we grew up with a lot of films from Bollywood. I remember it was a whole thing because growing up in the post-Soviet times, and then my parents in Soviet times, it was Bollywood was a big part of their cinematic upbringing. It was all the dancing and the songs, and they knew all the characters and the big Indian stars. They were probably on par with the American movies because this is what was available, and it was such a big part of the popular culture. I recently watched a very nice Pakistani film that I absolutely love, which is called Joyland.
Oh,
Uh,
nice. Yes,
yeah,
yes.
it's one of my favorites films in the recent times, and actually, my feature that I'm working on has some similar themes, and it was very interesting for me to see someone tackle such difficult topics in quite a traditional society. And
Mm.
there are many similarities, of course, it being a Muslim country and quite traditional in the way they look at things, and and I found that was such a refreshing film, although it was very difficult at times, but it was just so beautifully made. Point. So I think I haven't met the director. No, I just saw him a little bit on social media. It's funny because these days you can see people a little bit. You feel like you know them almost, but it's I'll tell you, the one thing is the contrast between that difficult reality of of someone's life within that traditional community, but at the same time with the joy of music and self-expression and dance, which is such also big part of the of cinema, of Indian and cinema from that continent, and it was really interesting for me, the celebration of life, this exuberance of color and dance, and how then on the other side of it you have that difficult family dynamics and expectations and traditions that you need to also fight against. But because they both are present, it's almost more human and easier to watch and tolerate one. It's kind of like brings the humanity into it, which I really liked. um I love I love the cinematography and being immersed in that place that usually unless you visit there you wouldn't see on screen. For me, it's very interesting to watch films from countries, places, sometimes villages or cities that we don't necessarily see all the time, and it's very interesting. It becomes like a whole journey into that culture and how they live. um and of course, yeah, I'm trying 5 points. Maybe I'll just say three, because as you know, it's very long points. Yeah, and I think that another thing, it's very beautiful to see how such a local story can have such a universal resonance. Because I think that no matter where you're from, when you watch this film, you can totally relate to it on a human level. And the beauty, the struggle, it's like life itself, the layeredness of it, how it's so complicated. There are no villains, everyone comes from a certain place with their certain desires and wishes, and how all of that is treated with a lot of respect and nuance. For me, that was very
Yes.
important because he really treats the community without judgment either. The patriarch and the more traditional mother and the more traditional elements of society, as well as the completely new, the ones that want to break free. There's no judgment. Everyone is, living their path, and it's just the conflict of tradition and this freedom is always, it's always going to be there. It's difficult. I know that there was a recent film that I wanted to watch. I don't really, the Joyland was, I know it's not Indian, it's Pakistani, but it's a difficult question. Yeah, I think that of course, we love Priyanka Chopra. I think she's very popular. I really follow her because I really admire her as a woman. I think that she has a lot of talent, but also this kind of feminine power that I really adore, when you have a very strong voice and at the same time you fully embrace your femininity and beauty, and at the same time you can be a real spokesperson for rights, for everything that she stands for, and I really admire her. Yes, I have, of course, but I need to remind myself names. I've watched a few, actually. Give me a second. I need to I'll tell you which one. There was a new one recently that was very good. I'm trying to remember the name of it. Sorry.
Yes, yes. You
Yes,
can
I
take
think
your
it was
time, no worries.
yeah. It was the White Tiger.
Yes.
Yeah, that was a very good one as well.
Why did you like White Tiger? If you can come back to the screen.
Oh, yeah. 1 second.
Yeah.
Let me just, yes. 1 second. I just want to make sure that's the one I mean. Again, for me, it's interesting to to see films that combine, let's say, the very traditional things with contemporary way of life,
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
and it's interesting to see, because I think that there's so much, oftentimes you expect like very traditional things from films from India, but also from our part of the world and from Middle East. It's always expected to be this traditional family drama, or and so when you have suddenly like contemporary twists and contemporary way of life and something that you can easily relate to, I think it brings a completely other level. And as younger filmmakers, this is what we need to talk about, because this is more our experience. And I think this break from tradition, but sort of staying within that, it's very beautiful. And of course, one of my favorite Indian directors is Mira Nair.
Of course, it has to be.
It has to
Yes.
be.
Why do you say that?
I mean, she's one of the. I remember I was listening when I first started on the filmmaking journey. I was listening to all her lectures and master classes. I think she's a very good storyteller, but she's also a very good teacher. It was during COVID, so I was stuck at home, and she was one of the people that I listened to, kind of consumed all the material she was putting out, because she was so generous also with how she taught her online classes. And I always felt that she had this it was very generous is the right word for her. I think that she goes really into the specifics and into her process, and how she tells the story is just so beautiful. And after that, I watched a few of her films, and it really just wonderful. Also the way she beautifully shows like Monsoon Wedding, and she shows this beautiful family dynamic that is full of color and this traditional thing, but at the same time she subverts it also with her costume design. She can use like very Indian kind of pastel earthly colors, but that are more from the nature, as opposed to just what we see, this Bollywood exuberance. Yet it's still exuberant and beautiful, but it's still very much rooted in the story. And that story of the little girl whose mother is in a brothel, it's that was also very interesting for me, because it's something that we don't see. It's not idealized, it's real life. It's not so idealized for the screen. And and again, the kind of the talk, the making the films that you care about, because she's in the US, or she's a very much Western director now, but she still feels very rooted in her country and in her community, and she tells the stories that she really wants to tell. And this is what I really love about her.